So just to give some background information for anybody who is not familiar with the program, so the National Security Language Initiative for Youth, otherwise known as NSLI-Y, is a scholarship program for American high school students that is funded by the U.S. Department of State and the Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs within that department. Every year, NSLI-Y brings about 600 students overseas to study a critical language such as Arabic, Chinese, Hindi, Indonesian, Korean, Russian, Turkish, and Persian for a summer or academic year, depending on the location and which option the applicant chooses. Students on NSLI-Y programs immerse themselves in the local culture and language, practice citizen diplomacy, and work to become experts in their target language. NSLI-Y has a lifelong impact, and all of us alumni here today can attest to that. It's definitely helped us beyond just the language immersion. So today you're going to be hearing from myself and Elaine, both alumni from the Persian 2018 summer program. And you'll also be hearing from Sophia and Tejas, who are alumni of the Tejas, who are also alumni of the 2019 summer Turkish program. So after we hear from the speakers, we'll have question and answer sessions for you all to ask questions. So you can either use the chat box to ask your questions during the event, or you can use the Q&A button, but it's probably easier for everybody to see if you just use the chat box. And when you are chatting to everybody and asking your questions, make sure to set your chat options so that you are chatting with everybody or to all panelists and attendees, so we can just all see your questions and everybody can learn. For those who cannot join us live today, we will be recording this webinar and we will post it on our NSLI-Y Interactive website after the event. So if you have anybody who couldn't make it, please let them know. And without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to our speakers for their presentations, beginning with Elaine and myself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Elaine, and Ryan and I are going to be talking a little bit about the NSLI-Y Persian program in Tajikistan.
So a little bit about ourselves to start. So I'm Ryan. I am a Persian alumnus of the Summer 18 program in Tajikistan. And I also happen to be the NSLI-Y alumni representative for the Florida region in the Southeast. And I am a freshman at the University of Florida.
I am also a Persian 2018 alum. Ryan and I were actually on the same program. I'm the NSLI-Y alumni representative for the Great Lakes Chicago region, and I'm currently a student at the University of Chicago. So we'll start by talking a little bit about why each of us decided to study Persian. So for me, I had studied Persian before for a few years, and I really wanted to have an opportunity to continue improving what I had already learned. And since I had studied Farsi before, I was especially interested in learning the Tajik dialects. And also, since I had just never been to Tajikistan before, I was really excited to have the opportunity to live there and to meet all kinds of people who live there. And in general, I think I was just super excited to be able to stay with a host family and actually, you know, talk to whole communities of people who could speak Persian.
So my reasons for learning Persian were a bit different. I knew that Persian was related to other Indo-European languages, including the language my family speaks, Urdu. And I really wanted to not only be able to read Persian poetry in its original language, but also gain a mastery of the Persian language to the point where I'd be able to understand all the advanced Persian loanwords that are present in Urdu. I also wanted to kind of gain a deeper and truer understanding of countries that are always misrepresented here in America, specifically Central Asia and countries in Central Asia with a Muslim majority. And so I really wanted to come to Tajikistan to learn more about their culture and countries in the region. And I also wanted to communicate with Iranian American communities here in the US because I'd been in contact with some before. And I just wanted to gain a deeper understanding of their culture and the people I already knew.
So, as you probably know, the NSLI-Y Persian program takes place in Dushanbe, Tajikistan. And if you talk to a lot of people, you know, a lot of them won't really know much about Tajikistan. And if you do, that's great. But if you don't, here are some quick facts that we put together about Tajikistan. So the capital is Dushanbe, and that's the city where we stayed for about 6 weeks, living with host families and, you know, attending Persian class. And we also went to a couple other cities nearby, but the bulk of the program takes place in Dushanbe. Tajikistan is also home to 10 million people, including a lot of different ethnic minorities, such as Uzbeks, Shugni, Russians, Koreans. And so a lot of the families there are very ethnically and culturally diverse and probably speak multiple languages, which is really interesting. The currency of Tajikistan is the somoni, and the exchange rate is about 10 somoni to $1. And just a fun fact is that on the roads, you'll see a lot of ice cream carts selling ice cream for 1 somoni, and it's just a really nice, cheap, delicious snack to have on a hot day because it gets really hot in the summer. And it's like a really nice memory that we had.
So I just want to talk really quickly about host families, which are frankly the best part of NSLI-Y. So with your host family, you'll be placed in a host family that can be either very small or very large, depending on how they are. And you'll be staying with them for the most of your stay. We initially stayed in a hotel for about 3 days just to get, you know, acclimatized to Tajikistan. But then when there was a national holiday, we moved in with our host family, and we started our journey with them. We had already had some classes, language classes, leading up to staying with them, and so we were able to communicate with them. And the great part about host families is that you can kind of clearly mark your progression in the language, because you can like say, oh, on day one when I first moved into my host family, I could not communicate this and this and this. Meanwhile, like by the end of your stay, you realize that you're able to communicate on a wide variety of topics with your host family, and you're able to really mark your progression in languages. To me, is really a wonderful thing. It's just like an easy way to keep practice of it. And depending on how much you interact with your host family, which should be a lot, you can really become a like member of the family. I mean, my family was very large. The extended family I had like 8 aunts and uncles. And so every time we would go over to somebody else's house or we'd meet relatives, they would all know who I was. And it made me just feel, you know, very comfortable where I was in Tajikistan, because I felt like I had a place to stay and a place where I belonged within a country that previously, I mean, I had no idea about before.
Mm-hmm. I have to say that living with a host family was what I was the most excited about going into NSLI. And you know, right now, like it's my favorite memory of being on NSLI, just because I feel like it's absolutely wonderful to be able to live with a family and talk to them every day and really get to know them. And I think I can speak for myself and most of the other students on the program when we say our families really like treated us like one of their own. On the left is a picture of Ryan and his family, and on the right is a picture of me with my host mother and her cousin who lived right next door. And my host mother is actually a dressmaker, so the dress that I'm wearing in that picture, she had picked out the fabric for the dress before I got there. And she showed it to me on the first day when I got to their house, and she asked me if I would like it, if she made a dress for me. And honestly, like, that was just one of the many, many things that she did for me that really made me feel like such a close part of the family. We also like would go to all these different family events, like on the weekends. A lot of times my host mother would go to her mother's house in another part of Dushanbe to help them clean the house and take care of the kids. And so I would go with her and sit in the backyard and play with all the kids in the family. Our neighbors also had a wedding, which was really exciting because the neighbors like came over to our courtyard to cook this giant pot of osh for the wedding. And our house was at the end of like a very narrow road, and so we all just poured out of the doors and stood on either side of the road to watch the procession with the bride coming slowly up and playing music. And just in general, like, I was so happy living with my host family. Like, I had all these like wonderful conversations with my host mother. And, you know, I played with my host brothers a lot because they were little and they were really adorable. And it was just honestly like my favorite part of NSLI.
So these are our teachers these were our teachers during the program. I believe that Mabjuda is still a teacher. I'm not so sure about Sadulo. Um, but any teacher you'll get during the NSLI Tajikistan experience will be amazing. Um, so we were paired with Mabjuda and Sadulo at different times of the day, which we'll explain in the next slide. But they were just incredible repositories of knowledge about the language, culture, and they really knew how to teach us and how we would understand. Instead of just throwing everything at us through immersion, if we didn't understand and we asked, they would know exactly what we were kind of having trouble with, because they've taught several generations of NSLI students as well as other CLS students, and just in general learners of Persian uh, in Tajikistan. Um, they also went with us on some excursions, including the overnight excursion. And especially during those, it was really helpful to have our teachers with us during our, natural experiences in the environment, because if something happened or a common word came up that we didn't remember during class, we could ask them and they would immediately clarify for us and just make everything clear for us. During class, they were incredibly helpful, and honestly they did have a curriculum to follow, but if there's something that you want to ask, or you have a lot of questions, they like the curriculum can be pushed aside for your question, because at the end of the day they understand that you are the ones that you learn at your individual pace, and you're not going to learn anymore if you don't understand the foundation.
A cool thing about the teachers too is that um, they they go on a lot of the excursions with us. So we'll talk a little bit about like what we do outside of class in the next few slides. But um, on the program, like you'll go to a lot of different like activities, like different cultural centers or overnight trips. And so our teachers would come with us a lot of times. And honestly, like that's pretty cool because we kind of got to talk to them outside of the classroom in a more casual setting and get to know them a little better. Okay, so NSLI-Y, like as you guys probably know, is primarily a language learning program. And so a lot of your time every week will be spent in class learning Persian. This is a photo of the classroom or the courtyard where Ryan and my classroom was back in 2018. They actually moved the classroom to a different place in Dushanbe this past year. But this is just kind of the area where we used to hang out after class. On the left, there was a sort of carpeted sitting area where all the students would kind of gather to relax during the break. And there were other families living in the courtyard, which was pretty neat because sometimes they would pop out and talk to us a little bit. But so like as for what you can expect in terms of class, it'll be about 6 hours a day, 3 hours in the morning and 3 hours in the afternoon. And for us, we had one class taught by each of the teachers. And so it would either focus on grammar or it would focus more on vocabulary and reading poetry or reading stories. Personally, like I came into the program with some experience in Persian already, but I really liked reading poetry and memorizing all these poems. Because it's a little bit different from typical colloquial Persian that you use every day with your family. And I really liked reading stories as well because they were a bit of a challenge. And for lunch, we would go down the road to a household nearby where Hola or auntie would cook lunch for us, like soup, bread, salads, all these different things. And we sometimes went there to take cooking classes, actually, which was a lot of fun because we learned how to make, all these different Tajik dishes. And the family living there was really sweet.
So another aspect of the kind of language experience of NSLI is the weekly excursions. So these will usually happen 3 to 4 times a week, and they will either be directly after class or at one point on the weekend, either Saturday or Sunday. And during this time, usually during these excursions, you're either going to visit a cultural and historic site or a site that's more kind of important to modern history, kind of more modern. So as an example, so we visited the fortress in Hisor, which is the picture you can see right there. That's our cohort of the year. And that's been around for several centuries, I believe since like 1200 AD. So it's been around for a long time, and we went around plenty of these places in Dushanbe from Soviet period and further back and then now. Another place we visited was the refugee center in Baghdad. So Baghdad is a city that has a large refugee population, refugees from Afghanistan, and we visited there and we taught English to them for just a class, and we really got to know these kids and refugees who are here. And another one we visited was the Asia Plus News Agency. So that was a really interesting look into how news is conducted in this different country where a lot of the population doesn't have access to, a personal computer. Instead, they use their phone or the radio or TV. So it's kind of interesting seeing how, they disseminate media in a place that's that has very different, commonly used technology than ours. These excursions are all conducted in Persian. So you get to apply, your classroom knowledge to the real world. And it's different from talking with your host family because when you go on an excursion, they'll have a tour guide or something, and they'll be explaining everything, but it'll be in formal Persian. And you'll be talking about, more serious things than, what's going to be for dinner tonight. So it's a great way to practice the formal Persian you learn as well. Another one of our excursions that we went on was to the Ismaili Center. So Ismailis are a religious minority within Tajikistan. They're a Shiite minority, and they have several centers around the world. And in Portugal, I believe they're building one in Austin, Texas, and they have a few more, I think, in the UK and other places. And there's also one in Tajikistan because there is a big Ismaili minority within Tajikistan. And this center serves as not only a place of learning, but also a hall where people communicate ideas and other important things. So we were there as part of a trip with American Councils because American Councils was hosting kind of a talk with Flex alumni. And Flex alumni are exchange students from Tajikistan who lived a year in the US and they went to high school in the US for a year. And at the Ismaili Center, we listened to all these people who had spoken there. And we also got to get a tour from one of the staffers at the Ismaili Center. And it was a really interesting experience because we got to see how, a minority religion lives and survives within a country that is Muslim majority, Sunni Muslim majority as compared to, Christian majority. So we went on an overnight trip, which is probably the best excursion that we went on over the course of the trip. It was 3 days, so Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And we had 3 main stops on that trip. So the first 3 stops was Iskanderkul, which literally translates to Alexander's Lake. It's named after Alexander the Great. And I presume that he visited this spot. And it's this amazing, large, mountainous lake, as you can see on the right there. And it's nestled within the mountains, and it's absolutely beautiful. There's tons of mountains all around. And it's obviously a very touristy place, as touristy as you can get in Tajikistan, but it's also an incredible experience because you get to see all of Tajikistan's nature. that night we stayed in not that little house. We stayed in a bigger house that was nearby. It was kind of like a hostel, and we were there in a valley among the mountains, and it was probably the best display of Tajikistan's natural beauty that we had throughout the entire trip. Our second stop was the city of Istaravshan. And the pictures you can see here are of an old Zoroastrian fire temple. So Zoroastrians obviously were the majority religion during the time, during centuries ago, until Islam came along. And so, but their, fire temples are still around. And although Tajikistan, I believe, has very few Zoroastrians compared to Iran, um, they do still have the fire temples around. So this was a massive complex. It's been turned into a museum, but it was very beautiful. It had tons of flowers, and it had inside, we had tons of historical artifacts, so we could see what they were doing in the fire temple at the time. And the final main stop on our trip was the city of Khujand, which is it's the major city in the north of Tajikistan. And it was really interesting coming here because a lot of the people who are here, there's a larger Uzbek population here. So the Tajik they speak is very Uzbek influenced. Their accent is different. Some of the words they use are different. Grammar is different. So it was really interesting being in this environment because not only were we seeing the city, we were also there to go to the bazaar that they had there, which, as you can see on the right, is a huge bazaar, not only for food and other, organic goods. They also had, t-shirts, technology, tons of other stuff. It was a massive complex. And it was really interesting because not only were we bargaining and putting into use those skills that we learned in class in like a very real way, we were also doing it with a dialect of Persian that we'd never heard before, and that we'd never been exposed to before, even in class, because we've never had anybody. Our teachers don't speak that dialect. So it was amazing going there and seeing not only the sites of Khujand, that's a mosque on a really old mosque on the left, and although tons of other stuff like that. But it was great seeing everything that there was there, and also experiencing the variations within Tajikistan.
I'll add that during all these weekly excursions, the overnight trip and everything, you're definitely going to get to know like the other students on your program really well, and your resident director and your local coordinator. And the Persian program tends to be pretty small, usually around like 11 to 12 students. And so like it's really like I never felt like I was just dropped in the middle of Tajikistan without a support network. Like there's always people around you who are very like supportive and are kind of like experiencing the same things you do, and you get to know them really well. Okay, so just to give you an idea of how your NSLI experience might be useful to you later on, or how, if you're interested in continuing learning Persian, what kind of options there are out there. We'll be talking a little bit about Persian after NSLI. So the most obvious options are like there are definitely like a lot of classes in college that offer Persian, and I'm sure high schools and colleges often have a lot of cultural activities that are related to Persian, and sometimes Persian student associations, and there's just a lot of opportunities out there to sort of like meet Persian speaking people, especially now with the internet and everything. Even if there aren't a lot of Persian speakers around you, like I found that it's really easy to connect with other people and to be able to practice your language skills with them. Ryan, do you want to talk a little bit about other languages and Turkish?
So at my university, they do not offer a Persian class. So I was also interested in taking Turkish, which has a substantial influence from Persian. So I've been taking Turkish, and it's interesting because I'm able to see the huge influence that Persian has had on Turkish. There's also similar grammar. And it's interesting because I'm able to kind of practice the same skills that I use with Persian and some vocab, but just in a different environment. I'm also planning on applying for several other study abroad programs to go back to Tajikistan since I cannot study Persian here. So the first one of these is the Critical Language Scholarship, or otherwise known as CLS. And it's very similar to NSLI, except it's a lot more intensive and there's going to be a lot more work, but then again, it is geared towards college students. And then there are other ones that you can do, but they're more geared towards, higher level, upperclassmen or graduate level students. And those are the Boren Awards, as well as Fulbright and other study abroad programs like that are government funded. I'm also, since I'm a linguistics double major, I'm also planning on conducting research on Farsi and or Tajiki, since I'm pretty much the only one who speaks it in the linguistics department. So it's kind of, if you have that experience and you have the connections like back in Tajikistan to talk to, it's pretty doable. And also another option is to join the Foreign Service or other government occupations. You can join the Foreign Service once you turn 18, which is a really extreme option if you're really wanting to practice your Persian. But Tajikistan is like always the last option for most Foreign Service officers, as we were told by many people at the US Embassy. So if you put Tajikistan as your first option, it will definitely help you. You can definitely practice your Persian that way.
Thank you guys so much for listening to us talk about Persian for 20 minutes. If you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out to either me or Rayan. We both really loved our time on NSLI. We both had, both similar and different experiences, and there's definitely a lot more that we can tell you and share about our time on NSLI. So yeah, feel free to reach out.
Specifically reach out on Facebook. So you'll be able to find us in any of the NSLI applicant groups. We should be in those groups, as well as having posted there saying that we are alumni representatives. And also you can just reach out to us in the chat box for the rest of the time, because we'll be there as well. Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.
So again, thank you everybody for listening to us for these 20 minutes. And so now we're going to be hearing from Sophia, who did the Turkish program this past summer.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Sophia Fagan. I have a language background in English, Spanish, and Portuguese. I lived overseas with my family my entire life. And so now I'm currently studying at the George Washington University, and some of the things I'm involved in are Army ROTC at Georgetown, archery, CNBC reporting assistant, and so on. So I have a lot of interests, but we can just go to the next slide because you guys are here to hear about Turkish exchange. So why Turkish? For me, I had several primary motivations. Number one, of course, you don't have to know any Turks, but I personally did know two main people who were essential in showing me glimmers and glimpses of the culture before I even showed up. So my hairdresser, since I was very little, she's Turkish, and my boss for my summer job last summer, he was Turkish as well. So I just became so curious about the country itself, its culture, the religious influence, and the history. Also, it's very globally relevant to international relations. I'm currently at the Elliott School right now in DC, and Turkey has made headlines in the news very recently as well with the northern Syria invasion, so it's only going to become more relevant. It has a rich history. As you can see, there are these two pictures that I took in Turkey. The leftmost picture is of the Yeşil Cami, which is the Green Mosque in Bursa. It's absolutely beautiful. It has these ornate decorations and green tiles inside. And then the other one you might notice from a history textbook is the Hagia Sophia, which started off as an Eastern Orthodox church under Justinian, and then was converted into a mosque. And then finally, I have a high interest in world religions, and Turkey is a perfect place to learn about this convergence of Eastern and Western religions all in one country. So there's incredible diversity, even amongst the Islamic population as well. Next slide. So just a little bit of history. I'm not going to delve too deeply into this, but Turkey did get its cultural origin from the Ottoman Empire. So Mehmet II invaded Constantinople in 1453 and established Istanbul. So later on, obviously you had the Age of the Sultans, which was very much based upon theocracy. But after World War I, the Ottoman Empire fell, and Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, who's in the black hat in this picture, he is the father of modern Turkey. And he established a secular republic, which is interesting because Turkey is one of the only countries considered in the Middle Eastern region that is secular and based on these modern democratic values. But then moving on to the modern issues, the current president of Turkey, Erdogan, who is in the picture, who's holding up his hand in the picture, he is actually a prime example of executive takeover. He's an elective leader who has made several authoritarian, who has taken several authoritarian steps. So nobody really knows the future of Turkey, and that is what makes it so interesting and such a point of contention. And two cultural fun facts. Number one is that Istanbul is actually the capital of tulips. If you thought that tulips come from the Netherlands, you're actually mistaken, because Dutch merchants showed up in Constantinople ready to take back to the Netherlands several agricultural seeds, agricultural materials, and with them they took tulip bulbs and capitalized on this new market. And another fun fact is that in the Topkapı Palace, which is one of the largest palaces in Turkey, as well as the seat of the Sultan in the Ottoman Empire, the Sultan was incredibly wealthy, and he actually had enough resources to send servants into mountainous regions to acquire ice to shave and make into sorbet. So the origin of the snow cone could possibly be from the Ottoman Empire. Next slide. So here's some highlights of my experience. I was answering some questions. I was answering a question in the chat previously, and I gave a little bit of a description of what I was able to do. But my 6 weeks in Turkey were absolutely filled with activities. So I had a 3-day trip to Istanbul with my host sisters. I was able to drink tea with my host cousins at their family-owned cafe, in which we talked, and that was, I think, my growing point for my Turkish language skills, was being able to, at the end of the day, practice what I learned and ask people questions in Turkish as well. I attended weddings and family events. I visited mosques, went shopping in bazaars, of course. You will get the chance to do all of the shopping. A lot of people buy spices, but I particularly bought a lot of Turkish delights there. I tried so many foods and desserts. I went to the beach, to my family's summer home. I volunteered at this camp called Camp Future Stars, which is a government a government subsidized camp that sends Turkish students to study English at this camp in Bursa. And I was able to go to some concerts and dance clubs. So these are all bonding experiences. Not only was I able to see and experience different things. But at the same time, I was doing this all with my host family. And so by the end of the trip, I become very close with my host family as well. And you'll discover that all of these families want to show you their culture. They want you to participate in their life. So these trips, these excursions are great ways to do it. And unlike Ryan and Elaine, the Turkish exchange program gives you the liberty to do more of your own individual excursions. We did not have formal cultural excursions. At least we didn't have many. Toward the end, we did go all together with the student group to Istanbul to see the highlights, but a lot of us had varied experiences because of this. So if you go into the country itself, doing a little bit of research as well, you can ask, hey, can I go to this museum? Can we go here? Or how close is this, right? So that your host family can possibly see what you're interested in. Next slide. All right, so how will I use my Turkish? Right now, as I said, I'm in university, and although I'm not currently enrolled in a Turkish class, I'm looking at various options in DC, university courses, as well as other courses at the language institutes, since I'm in a metropolitan area. Also in DC, we have Turkish food and dance festivals. I have made several friends, which is actually the last bullet point, but I've made several friends here at GW who are Turkish, and so we just have plans to go to these food festivals, and I believe in the next week I'm going with a friend to a Turkish cafe. There's apparently a woman who owns her own cafe, and she makes this staple Turkish food called simit. It's like a street bagel. And then also I'm applying to be a counselor at Camp Future Stars to see where that will take me, where that opportunity will take me. And in addition, a possible summer class at Istanbul University would be beneficial for me. I definitely look forward to going back to Turkey. It is an absolutely amazing country with people who are extremely generous and hospitable. And so, next slide. So now, well, this slide says advice for prospective applicants, but I'm going to instead focus on persuading you to apply to the Turkish program. So when I applied to NSLI-Y, I did not have Turkish particularly in mind. I did have these personal connections in the US to Turks. However, I didn't see myself at the outset studying Turkish. However, now that I have more knowledge in the language, I will say that it is vastly interesting to learn a language with Western script, with Latin letters, that has heavy influence from Arabic and Persian. This language will open up many doors for you if you learn how to be proficient in it. In terms of employment, but also in terms of friendships. There are so many immigrant populations here from Turkey and from Turkic speaking peoples. So you will also be able to connect more with this population. And in addition to the employability and to the friendships, I think Turkey has definitely many misconceptions, just like Tajikistan. There are people who believe that the environment in Turkey might be dangerous. It might be conservative due to Islamic influence. And although there are elements that are true to that, I think the thing that I took back from my experience in Turkey was how much the media and our Western perspective warps cultural interactions. And I think that if you were to go to Turkey, you would have an amazing time. There's so much food to be tasted, so many places to be seen. And in addition, I would like to comment that prior to this trip, I was quite a picky eater. I did not like too many things. And going on this trip really forced me out of that comfort zone. And so it allowed me to develop as a person who's able to socialize with people, even with a language barrier, as well as, allowed me to try so many new things. So if you guys have any questions for me, I will also leave some accounts in the comment box where you can contact me. I unfortunately don't have Facebook, so I don't interact on that platform, but I truly hope that all of you have learned something from this presentation. If I can provide you with more information as to how the classes are structured, or I can ease any sort of doubt, please contact me and ask me questions in the chat box as well. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Sophia. That was an amazing presentation. And last but not least, we will be hearing from Tejas, who also went on the Turkish summer program this past year.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Tejas, and with Sophia, I went to to Bursa, Turkey this past summer. So, like Sophia, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about daily life in Bursa, Turkey, about the host family, about why you should pick Turkish, and also just a brief overview of how to best form your application for NSLI as well. So first, about the host family. I think this is unique to Turkish and Turkey, or at least not super common among other programs, but everyone on the Turkey program had a host sibling. And that's one thing that the organization that runs NSLI in Turkey sort of tries to emphasize, because I find that since I had host siblings, it was a lot easier for me to learn the language and just have a lot of fun in Turkey. I had two host brothers named Doruk and Ruzgar, and they were 11 and 7. And my host family took me to really cool places. Like Sophia said, we didn't have a lot of structured cultural excursions, but what our host families were able to do in lieu of that is on the weekends and after classes, which I'll talk about in a second, they were able to take us to really cool places. So for example, my host family took us to Istanbul, which I'm sure all of you all have heard of, but there's this small village with a waterfall and a really, really nice restaurant called Alacham, which is a village outside of Bursa, Turkey. And just a little bit more about Bursa in particular, because that is, if you choose to apply to Turkish and are selected, that's where you'll most likely be staying. Bursa is a city with a population of 4 million people, which sounds really, really big, especially if you're from like a mid-sized city like I am. But it's really not that big because you'll mostly be staying in the city center. I lived the furthest out from the city center, and I was only like 30 minutes away. So that's one thing that's important to note. I'm not sure if this is similar in most programs, but in Bursa, you'll be taking a lot of public transportation, a lot of public buses and metros. So your transportation will essentially be taken care of by NSLI as well, as far as like paying for your Metro card and your bus card and that sort of thing. And then as far as the daily life is concerned, just a little bit about that. You wake up at around 6:45 or 7, which sounds early, but honestly, you get used to it really, really quickly. I shower, get ready, do all that stuff, and then eat breakfast, which Turkish breakfast is amazing. Sophia touched on this a little bit, but it's, with like cheese is a staple of Turkish breakfast. And so we're multiple different types of bread and olives and tomatoes. And so it's really, really good, but I'm digressing. And then after, I would leave the house at around 8 and then take the bus and then catch a metro and then reach the Ismaili Center, which is where we had language classes at around 9 a.m., which is when classes would start. Turkish classes would go from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m., and these classes would basically be like your general language class. We got this textbook and accompanying workbook where we did a vast majority of our learning, but outside of sort of the structured, this is unit 1, this is unit 2, our teacher oftentimes showed us videos, like music videos or clips from daily Turkish life that sort of added into our language classes. And so one worry I sort of had going into NSLI was the language classes. I thought it would be boring, but that's definitely not the case at all. One of the great things about NSLI language classes is they know you guys are all high school students learning, so they really try and tailor the class to that, and they really try and make the class as interesting as possible. Unlike Persian, we had a lot of free time afterwards. After classes ended, they ended at 1 p.m. So oftentimes I would go explore the city of Bursa with other people in my cohort, or I would go home and hang out with my host siblings until bedtime, which was at around 10 p.m. It's a lot of free time, but you honestly find ways to fill it. One of the biggest concerns I also had about NSLI is just about the homework, but it wasn't really that bad. I think the maximum I had was maybe an hour or 2 a night. But one tip to get the most out of NSLI, as many alumni will tell you, is stay on top of your language studying, because that'll be really, really useful for language acquisition and that sort of thing. So one of the things, like Sophia, that I somewhat struggled with at the beginning of my NSLI application was deciding what language to choose, because there are so many. There are 8 languages, and so it can be difficult really to pick Turkish or Persian or Russian out of all of the 8. But sort of to sway you to pick Turkish, Turkish is a relatively widely spoken language in the Caucasus region and in the Middle East, so it's useful for if you want to work in that region. That region is a really, really bustling region. It's up and coming, and so Turkish is a really useful language for that. The language itself is really, really unique and different. There are concepts like vowel harmony or agglutination, which if you're a linguistics nerd like me, feel free to go look it up. But it's just really, really different in terms of its grammar, its vocab, and it's different from many languages that you'll be studying in school. So it's really, really a fun language to learn. In the US, especially in DC, which I live near, there's a large Turkish diaspora, so you'll be able to put your Turkish knowledge to good use. Like Sophia mentioned, Turkey is becoming increasingly important in foreign affairs, in wars, in military. So learning Turkish can be useful if you want to go down the national security or foreign relations front. And then also, the biggest concern I would say I had during NSLI was me being a vegetarian, because vegetarians often struggle with eating, eating out in foreign countries. But if you're a vegetarian, don't worry. Turkey was a really, really good country for that. Okay, next slide, please. So just some things I gained from NSLI. Number 1 is just a greater appreciation for the power of languages. When you are in the NSLI program, you're thrust into a country where you have no idea how to speak their language. And so it can be really, really difficult at first, but you learn to not only communicate through hand gestures and through nonverbal cues, you also learn how important language is, and that's something I really gained from NSLI. One thing is, another thing is I learned a general sense of what I want to do in the future, either through diplomacy or international work. That by no means that you have to be interested in diplomacy to do NSLI, but NSLI really changes you and your viewpoints as a person. I gained a lot of friends, both in Turkey and from the US, that will last me a lifetime. I gained a greater understanding of culture and religion that I'd not been exposed to previously. And last, I gained experience as a global citizen ambassador, which is something you'll hear a lot. As part of the NSLI program, NSLI students are really citizen ambassadors, and that means they talk to, people on the ground. They talk to, in my case, Turks about the United States, and they can dispel misconceptions and that sort of thing. So being part of NSLI, it's not just a really fun experience, it's a really important experience to help increase understanding among our two nations. Okay. And then the last slide I have here is simply just some application advice for you guys, because the applications are due in, I believe, 9 days. So definitely, I hope this advice will be a little bit helpful for you. Number one, and this is key, is that your essays are the most important part of your application. There are a lot of parts to the application, but one thing I found as an applicant is that the essays tend to be sort of the differentiating factors. The key thing is proofread. I know one of my friends who applied to NSLI a couple years back but didn't get it, made a simple spelling mistake on her essay, and that might not have been the reason why she didn't get in, but it's important to proofread, of course. Be honest and true to yourself. Don't write just what you want, what you think they want to hear, what you think NSLI wants to hear. This is really critical and something that I struggled with a little bit, but they want to pick individuals. They want to pick unique people for this program. So don't think, okay, I need to be interested in diplomacy for NSLI to get into NSLI. Rather, you should feel your own interests, realize truly why you want to do this program, and express those, and you'll be fine. Next is to think deeply about why you want to go to your chosen program, like I already said, because one of the biggest essays is the 3 reasons essay. So definitely think about what you'll use the NSLI experience for in the future. And then for the host family letter, which I found to be my hardest essay, don't stress too much about it, but simply write about what you would want to do if you were hosted by a family for 6 weeks. Talk about how you would mesh into their family dynamic, and really talk about how you would contribute to not only that one family, but to the general atmosphere of the city that you're staying at. A key thing is to make sure you highlight aspects of your application that are important and keyword unique to you. Try and think of the things that really make you tick and also make you different, and really highlight those on the application. And one thing that I've realized from being an applicant and from hearing stories from different applicants all across the country is NSLI wants to know as much as possible about you and what makes you tick. And so the key thing is to make this application about you. Don't make it about something you think NSLI wants. Don't make it about someone that you're not. Make it about you. And if you speak to yourself and your true passions, you definitely have a really, really good shot of getting into NSLI. And that's all I have for today. Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much, Tejas, for your amazing presentation on Turkish program. So we'd now like to open up the event to questions from the audience for the speakers. If you share your questions over the chat box, I'll read them out loud, and we will, one of us will answer them in person as opposed to typing them out in the chat. So yeah, just type in the chat box and we will get back to you. So I just got a question. Do you have any time management tips to help NSLIans stay on top of their language studies? So does anybody want to chime in on that?
Yeah, I will. If that's cool.
Yeah.
So I typed in a little bit of a response, but I think all the students end up developing their own methods as to how they are going to manage this shock. just constantly being bombarded with a new language, a new alphabet, new letters, new sounds, and such. So the first thing that I wrote about was to do your homework right after class, or right after acquiring the knowledge that you're going to practice, because actually your brain is can function much better when you've just studied, for example, the conjugations that you're going to have to do for your homework. There were some nights when I would just do my homework last minute because my host sister and we were out doing stuff, and it was 10 times harder for me to pull out this knowledge that I learned from my teacher earlier that day. I would, forget how to conjugate things, and it just doesn't bode well, because at that point, if you're tired doing your homework, you tend to also go to Google Translate sometimes, and that's not the best strategy for language learning. So then second thing is I ended up buying a small notebook in Turkey, and I would carry it around with me, and whenever I would find myself not knowing a key word, like there are words that you are going to have to use every day. So whenever you don't remember this key word, or if there's a word that you're constantly forgetting, often the words for directions like right, left, straight, or things that will help you with public interactions, you can write them down in your notebook, and whenever you forget them again, you can look back at that notebook. Don't ask people who know English, what was this word again? Because then you're going to rely on others for supplying you these words. Then 3, it helped me immensely to just be in public situations and order my own food, and buy my own things. Ask people in public transportation for directions. Or one time I was in the downtown area and I didn't know how to get back to the metro. So that day was just great for language learning, because I was able to ask people where this location was, and they could sign to me and I could understand as well. And then 4, there's like this routine of questions that is essential to being a human, like how was your day? What do you want to do later? What do you want to eat? Things like that. So if you ask those questions and you always have answers to those questions as well, then you'll develop this instinct of the language that will allow you to get used to social interactions with that. So, I mean, if anyone wants to add on, those are my tips.
We actually just have time for one more question. So if anybody has a question, please answer, type it in the chat now. Or do the Q&A box thing. So I have a question from a 4. So it's, did you have prior experience with your target language? And if not, what difficulties did you face and how did you overcome them? So we have time for just one person to answer. So preferably somebody who hasn't had experience, sorry, Elaine, with the program, because I know most people do not have the opportunity to learn Turkish or Persian at their high school or through a program. Tejas, do you have anything to say?
Yeah, sure, I can go. So on the Turkish program, there were like 2 people, I think, who had prior experience, and both of those had very little prior experience. So Turkish, at least for the Turkish program, and I think for all NSLI programs, prior experience is definitely not a necessity, and is something that NSLI tailors to. Initially, when you step foot into your new country, when you have no idea what the language is, of course it's going to be a little bit difficult, but the key thing to understand is that everybody who's on program with you, or at least mostly everybody, is going to be in the same boat with you of learning how to communicate, learning basic words like yes, no, thank you. So that's one key thing. And another thing is there's going to be one person who's going to be the main adult on the program called your resident director, and he's fluent in both, he or she is fluent in both your target language and English, and will be able to help you in both languages to converse with people and get you where you need to go and get you the things that you need, at least initially when you are struggling with the language at the beginning. But just the key thing is don't worry about struggling with learning a new language, because especially in a program like NSLI, it'll come really, really quickly.
Thank you so much, Tejas, for that information. And thank you, everybody, for your questions and for your answers to our panelists. So just a reminder for all the prospective students tuning in, the application deadline for the 2020-2021 programs is October 30th at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can check out NSLI-Y Interactive, which is a website for all the virtual event recordings, as well as kind of blog posts written by current NSLI students and alumni. And lastly, please check out this quick survey. It's the last link there below. And there's also a link in the chat box. And you can give your feedback about tonight's event. So a big thank you to all of you for joining, panelists and attendees. And have a good night. And if you have any more questions, feel free to reach out to us through any of the contact infos that we left in the chat box. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.